Hi, everybody. It's Bob Ost. This is Theater Resources Unlimited. It's our Friday community gathering. This is the 134th consecutive community gathering. It might be the 135th. I keep forgetting to check before I start. But we've been doing these since April 17th, 2020. It was a response to good old COVID, our pal COVID, who's been with us for all these years now. People were feeling lonely and lost, and somebody suggested I open a Zoom room. It's like, what's a Zoom room? I don't know what a Zoom room is. So, but they sort of took my hand. I opened up a Zoom account and we started a Zoom room, and people actually come and spend time with us every Friday. I'd say we get an average of 30 to 50 people every Friday in the room. If you'd like to be one of them, if you're in YouTube or podcast land right now, you can shoot me an email at trunltd@aol.com and ask to be put on the Zoom list, and we'll invite you, and then you can be part of the conversation and here with us, and hopefully have a nice personal experience rather than watching us taped. So why do we do this? We do this for several reasons. We did this so that people that were living through a pandemic, really? I still can't quite grasp the fact that we've gone through this. The people living through a pandemic were able to actually feel less isolated and come together in a room and talk about things. And true being who we are and what we are, what we do is we talk about theater. So these are true talks about theater every Friday. At one point, we were talking a lot about making art in a pandemic, and we're talking about shutdown and talking about issues that we're going through. We also touched on politics, and we touched on marketing, and we touched on all sorts of things in terms of the shutdown, and also in terms of what we anticipated happening once we came out of shutdown. Good news is, in case you haven't heard, you can open your doors now. Quarantine is over. However, COVID is not over. So even though we are out here in the world now, and we're going live, and we're doing performances, and we're eating out, and we're going to symphonies and shows and everything else, it's still not a bad idea to be careful, be cautious. Most of us are not vaccinated and boosted, and we can probably deal with whatever COVID tries to hand us, but there are other people out there who are more vulnerable. And for their sake, let's continue to be conscious and mindful, please, everyone. So our conversations have changed. We're talking more about theater as we used to know it in the good old days. And one thing that actually, a topic that we haven't touched on in the past two and a half years is licensing, which is something that we always talk about in True. I always make a point to have a conversation about it at least once a year. And the thing that I've discovered, licensing it's a word. Licensing means permission. That's what a license is, permission. But everybody seems to lump licensing into whatever basket they're holding. But we want to this is about disambiguating and also offering insights into the world of licensing for everybody. So we're going to talk about different kinds of licensing. And I have some really good people here to talk about it. I don't think I could do much better than this. We have, if those of you who read the marketing that we did about this, there's a little bit of a change in terms of who's with us. We were going to have Brad Lawrence from Theatrical Rights Worldwide, but Michael McDonough is playing the part today of Brad Lawrence. And so, hi, Michael, welcome to True. Liz Ulmer, who has always been the person that we were expecting from Sony Music Publishing. Is that right? Sony Music, did I got the name right? Okay. Liz is here. Liz, we haven't seen a lot of each other over the years, but I have to say that I think of you as a friend, and you're always somebody that is willing to help out, and I appreciate you very much.
Oh, thank you.
And I thought it might be a good idea to add a legal point of view to this, because there are lots of legal aspects of licensing. And so I'm happy to welcome to the room Eric Goldman, dear friend of True. He's if you haven't met Eric yet, then you haven't been active with True. He's been with us so many times, and he always gives the legal aspects of things in our workshops, and he's been a guest on this community gathering as well. So guys, turn on your mics and let's engage you in these conversations. I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about who you are and what you do. And I'm actually going to start with Eric, and I'm going to lead into the two people that are here from the licensing world. So Eric, tell us a little bit. Why do you know anything about licensing?
Why do I know anything about licensing? Because I was always picked last for dodgeball in middle school. That's why.
That's the right answer.
I am an entertainment lawyer, and almost every deal that I don't do litigation, I do contracts. And most every deal that I do involves a license of one form or another. So I have a representative transaction that just happened this week that ends with a cautionary tale. So I got a call this week from someone who's putting together a one-person show. And they had paid a deposit to present this one-person show at APAP next month in January. And they have, during the show, they perform 8 songs, excerpts from 7 songs and 1 song in full. So why is that relevant to this conversation? APAP is a conference where people go in search of a relationship with a company that will take on their show and license it. You'll sign an agreement with a producer or a booking agent or a licensing company, and they will then license theaters and schools and whoever across the country to give them the right to present your show. That's why people go to APAP, to develop these relationships where they can enter into agreement with someone who's gonna get licenses for them so that their show can be produced. I mentioned the part about where the show includes some music because that's another form of licensing. This person created an original show about this person's story. And they incorporated some materials that they didn't own. And so in order to present that material, that musical material in the show, they needed to enter into a separate type of license. They needed to license the right to incorporate this pre-existing material into their show. So I told this story because it kind of shows in broad strokes the 2 major forms of licensing that there are. There's licensing out, where you're giving people the right to produce your show, and there's licensing in, where you're acquiring rights into your show. Now here's the cautionary tale. This person came to me a month before they wanted to present this show at APAP. And that is not enough time. Liz is killing her. She just, yeah, okay.
Been there every day.
It's not that, and this is music, it's not that music publishers do not want you to succeed. It's that the sheer volume of requests that they get necessitates, it takes them several months to process your request. So that's the cautionary tale. If you are licensing material in, it's something to do sooner rather than later, because later is usually too late.
So we're going to get into some of the details later, but I want to basically set the stage for everybody. So I'm going to move to Mike McDonough. Do I say your name right?
Yes, sir.
So Mike, are you a Michael or a Mike?
I am a Michael, please.
Michael. So Michael, tell us, this is one of the aspects. Actually, you represent the 2 aspects of what Eric was just talking about. And I'm going to push the conversation later to talk about some other things that involve licensing that you didn't mention. So Michael, tell us a little bit about Theatrical Rights Worldwide and what you did. I also understand that you were with Musical Theater International, MTI, Music Theater International. That's it. At one
Yes.
point. So
Yes.
tell us what are those? I think
What
most
are
people know.
those?
Most people
MTI,
know.
we are, TRW is more of a boutique agency, meaning that our catalog is kept to chosen, handpicked items. We've just recently, within the last 6 months, expanded from musicals into straight plays. So we have a play catalog now. It's in its infancy. I started as an actor. I worked as a company manager in cruise lines. Did a lot of TYA work as an equity actor, and began at MTI. Was there for 6 to 8 years, and ran their amateur department. So when Steve Spiegel left MTI, I left shortly afterwards, and then I roamed the country and the seas, and got back into the game. TRW is founded and owned by Steve Spiegel, who was MTI's president for 25-ish years. When he had some need here, I left company management and joined the TRW team in 2016. What else? We like MTI and Concord and TRW Dramatic Publishing is a little bit smaller, but we all have Broadway titles, I think, which distinguishes us from some of the smaller houses. We license the shows, not first class rights, it's stock and amateur, secondary licensing worldwide for most of the titles we represent are international worldwide. Some are limited to North America only. Our job is to exploit the works we represent to the best of our ability.
Well, let's take it from the other point of view. Let's start with the show. We have people in the room who are all writers. Why would they want their show to be licensed, and how does that happen?
Why do you want it licensed? It's
obvious, but
well,
but
otherwise you're gonna have to do it yourself, or unless you have such a brand that people are gonna come to you, and Godspeed if they do, that's great. But unless that's something you intend to do, administer it yourself and deal with W-9s and purchase orders from schools.
Well, let's not assume that everybody in the room knows about the business. So let's tell them a little bit what that means to be licensed. I don't know. How often is it always the case that when a company licenses a play, they also publish it? Or does that not always happen? People, there are certain things that people have in their heads about what happens. I think licensing means that they get published. I think that means that they have a company that has published their work and is able to professionally present it to people that are interested in possibly doing it and furthering the life of the show. We also want to talk about how a producer fits into this. So, Eric, you can jump in too, because you do the legal stuff on this all the time.
Well, folks use the terms licensing house and publishing house interchangeably. Technically, when we represented musicals only before we started our play division earlier this year, you could more technically call us a licensing house because we didn't publish a retail product. The libretto is not published. We don't publish. We only represent the show. We charge a materials fee and collect the royalties on behalf of the author. So technically, we're a licensing house at that point. When you start to use the word publisher, I think of retail product, and that means a play that is on the book at a drama bookshop or an Amazon, etc. So we are now, in that regard, also a publishing house because we represent plays and we sell those books and split split that revenue with the authors. Whereas with a musical that is not published, I'm not talking about R&H shows that might have, or a very, very popular show like Rent had a hardback and a retail product, but generally well, even the Promas, that's a good one. I don't think Jersey Boys has ever gotten a book that you can go buy at the bookstore. Maybe from the movie, you can there's some kind of a souvenir book, but I don't think that's a script or curtains. Like you can't go and buy at the drama bookstore a script of curtains, so it's not published in that regard. So the materials are provided to the licensee, and we collect a fee for providing those materials and servicing those materials.
And
Is
I
that
think
distinction? Go ahead, sorry.
legally we should distinguish between a published play and a licensed play. Now you can go out and buy a copy of a play, and you can also buy, you can go out and buy a copy of a play, right? And you can read it in the comfort of your own home. But that does not give you the right to publicly perform that play. That does not give you the right to take that play and make multiple copies and hand it out to a cast. If that's what you want, if you want to publicly perform the play, you need to license the performance rights. So it's two separate bundles of rights.
But the happy thing is that most of the licensing houses are able to provide a published version of it. Michael, you said there are some situations where you actually haven't had the materials, but very often the licensing house can actually provide published materials that people can use for production. No? Yes?
Yes, that is our primary objective. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So in pushing this whole thing, I think I've confused people more than I've clarified it.
Possibly.
I want to go back to where this all starts. It starts with the play. It starts with the show, and you as a writer, and Eric, you can take this off my platter anytime, but I'm going to start. You as a writer basically are looking for opportunities to get your work out there. Sometimes, if you're lucky, a producer finds you, or you find a producer and you get produced. But sometimes you are your own person trying to make your play happen and make things happen. The likelihood is, and you can correct
You know
me
what
if I'm
I
wrong.
want to do, because this is my first time seeing Liz face to face. We have emailed on a couple of projects, and
Aren't they nice faces to face?
Yes, and I'm desperate to hear her voice. So I'm so tempted to say, Liz, what's the status of my licenses? But I know that's entirely inappropriate. But I mean, can you respond to what I was saying about licensing materials in and how the music industry works in that field? Because that'll help me move forward.
Absolutely. Well, just for a sort of a little context about what I do. So I work for Sony Music Publishing, and it's funny, Michael was just talking about the word publishing. In the music world, it means something very different, and it encompasses so many different things. It involves, so as publishers, we represent songwriters, not performing artists. That's a very different thing, related, but different. So what we do is we represent the interests of songwriters in terms of, putting out albums. If their music wants to be is going to be in a movie, or if you're going to print lyrics on a, Beatles lyrics on a T-shirt, like those, that all goes through music publishing. What I do specifically at Sony is I oversee the licensing of any songs in the Sony catalog for anything theatrical. So that includes, I've worked on many Broadway jukebox musicals like MJ, Ain't Too Proud. We have a ton of songs in Moulin Rouge, as does every publisher in the world. And also off-Broadway dance, plays that incorporate music, cruise ships. I do a ton of cruise ships. They're the bane of my existence. But so, in terms of securing those rights, one thing that Eric was talking about earlier, about making sure that you do it, once you know you're going to use a song, even if you think you might want to use a song, let's say there's a list of 10 songs. Ultimately, we might use 6 or 7. Request the rights, because speaking what Eric was saying about the volume of what we get in, I think I'm currently working on about 150 deals at the moment. They're all in various stages of negotiation, but also bear in mind that with songs, we oftentimes need to go to approval parties who represent the songwriters to get explicit approval based on the terms that are being offered. So for instance, with Moulin Rouge, they came to us, they said, we want to use the song Bad Romance. That involves two authors, Lady Gaga and another guy named Nadir Kayat. So I had to send their representatives, these are the details of this license. This is how much they're going to pay. This is what you're going to make once it goes into stock and amateur. These are the details about how they want to use the song. And it becomes a very extensive conversation. So it's not as simple as us looking at a request and being like, okay, done, checking that off. Very often it involves a lot of different parties, and it is a very, very extensive, complicated process. So definitely the earlier you can get that, the better. And sort of as it ties into, your show as a property being licensed out to, whether it's through a TRW or whether you're licensing it yourself or producing it yourself, you're going to need to warrant that you have the rights to use those songs. So let's say you go to APAP and they say, great, I want to license this show. I'm really excited about it. I see you're using these 8 songs. Can you provide written proof that you have permission to include these songs in the show? And you're really would want to have all of that work done because, except in specific instances, somebody who's going to be essentially buying your work is not going to want to do all that work. So yeah, so that's very important.
To go back to theatrical licensing, the thing I wanted to explain to people was how that happens. If you're basically produced by a producer, you have a contract, and in your contract, licensing and subsidiary rights and all that will be spelled out in terms in your contract. So the thing that people don't always know is that if a producer fulfills his obligations with your contract and produces your show in a certain kind of venue for a minimum of 30 performances or whatever you lay out in your contract, the producer now participates in the rights. The person that gets the royalties, which is like, if I'm wrong, you got to stop me, guys. But the person that gets the royalties from theatrical licensing is the author. The author, you generally owns the rights, but you are basically sharing your royalties with your producer once they have fulfilled their part of the bargain. That's the thing I wanted to explain to everybody. Do you want to clarify that? Do you want to put it into more concise legal terms, Eric, or do you want to say that I'm out of my mind? I mean, I feel like I'm like, doesn't anybody believe what I'm saying?
No, look, you are absolutely right, and there are various different schools of thought on this, but the basic premise is this: a commercial producer produces your show, and in so doing, they have enhanced the value of your show. They have made it, and Michael can probably speak to this. If you haven't been commercially produced, the likelihood that a TRW or another licensing house is going to be interested in investing in taking your play on and investing the time and energy and seeking productions for it is much lower. So it is true, by producing it commercially, the producer does raise the value of your property. And in so doing, they earn the right to share in some percentage of the income you receive from the exploitation of what we call subsidiary rights. And subsidiary rights, in a nutshell, are rights that the author controls. So while the producer is going to acquire live stage rights, and the producer is going to acquire, if it's a musical, the right to create cast albums and the right to create merchandise, the authors are going to hold back film rights, television rights, some other things. So, and for this conversation, most importantly, stock and amateur rights. So when, and it varies. It used to be that a producer would have to produce commercially in New York City to vest in the right to share in your subsidiary rights income. Increasingly, that is not the rule. Producers are now vesting in the right to share in subsidiary rights income for productions outside of New York City. And that has a lot to do with changes in the marketplace, the reduction of the available of off-Broadway houses, the reduction in available smaller houses, and the growth of theater hubs across the country. But what Bob is saying is true, that when a commercial producer successfully produces your show, they do get the right to share. They do have the opportunity to vest in the right to share in your licensing income.
Thank you. I wanted to get the basics laid out for people because I know there's a lot more that we want to talk about.
But it doesn't go on forever. There's a term.
Right, there's a term, and again, like anything else in this business that we all should be aware of, everything is negotiable, and there needs to be agreements. So, so you negotiate the terms of this with your producer when they option your show. The other thing I wanted to say about that, and Eric touched on it, if you don't have a production, a show that's been produced, it's not impossible to get it licensed. Oh, I also want to make sure everybody's clear that although we're talking about musicals today, this applies also to plays. There are companies that only do plays, and we're also going to talk about Concord and what Concord is and how it has affected the business. So, I just wanted to share some of that with you. I don't know if there are any questions that I'm raising. I don't see a lot of stuff going on in the chat, so I did see one question. Maureen wants to know, what does a musical author need to submit to the licensing company? Piano, vocal, music sheet, fully orchestrated sheet, or 7-piece pit band? I don't know whether the author submits to the. Let's talk about this, Michael and Eric, and also Liz. Liz, I know you're at Sony, but you were a theater gal for many, many years, and you know the business inside out. So let's talk about what a writer does if they don't have a Broadway show and they want to get licensed. How does that happen? Can it happen? I know it can happen. I've seen it happen, but it's not likely. It's not common. Michael, do you want to take on that? I think I know your catalog. I know your catalog. Your catalog has a lot of shows that never had Broadway productions.
Everyone's catalog has shows that have not received first class productions. Yes. Correct.
Have you ever brought a show on board for licensing that hasn't had a substantial production? So yeah, let's talk about that a little bit.
It is possible. It's much less likely. Unless it's hitting a hole in our catalog that we feel that that we can exploit. If, for example, looking at the school market, the largest request from schools in North America is girls. They don't have any boys in their shows. So if you had a show that featured girls, if you had a show that also featured perhaps something trendish along Marvel, or Marvel lines like superheroes perhaps, or Potterish kind of things that might fill a hole that we know there's a need out there with schools perhaps, and that would raise interest. The other reason we would look is for perhaps an author potential down the line. If we believe in someone, the quality of work, then perhaps we'll take on something that has yet to be first class or will never receive a first class, in the hopes that you would stick with us, although there's no there's no faith in the business that will happen because the dollar talks over all else pretty primarily. But an investment in someone in a work, a first work or a second work, or a work that is only in Lord theaters that won't come to New York or have a huge brand presence somewhere. There's that kind of side door entrance also.
I know I produced a show in 2014, and it actually got licensed out of a festival, Midtown International Theater Festival. I was hesitant about it. Basically, if a show doesn't have credentials, it makes it harder for the licensing house to actually sell them. But the licensing house's job is still to find a marketing hook for it, which is what you're talking about. If it's a Potterish, if it's got a Marvel, some sort of Marvel vibe to it, something that you think you can actually market. So I want to just remind everybody in the room that licensing houses aren't necessarily being exclusionary. They're not, trying to exclude you. They're just looking for things that they think they can sell, because it would be very lovely for you to get picked up and put into a catalog for a licensing house, but it doesn't do you a lot of good if nobody's going to buy the show for production or license. That's the word we're talking about today, license. If nobody's going to license the show for production. So if you're going to submit something to a licensing house, it's basically, you have to think the same way that you're thinking if you're trying to submit something to a producer. Why this show? What is the audience? How they're going to sell it? I mean, it's not necessarily a writer's job to know all this, but it sure helps if you can give some ideas and if you get someone to put a little flame under the fire for somebody to go, oh yeah, this might have some value. This might have some possibilities. Before we, I hate the sound of my own voice. So if anybody else want to say anything? I'm trying to, have we really covered, Eric, you handle a lot of authors, as you're their attorney. Are there any situations that we should be aware of in terms of licensing that would be useful for people to know?
Ooh, that's a broad question. I think that okay. Another real true stories ripped from the life of Eric Goldman. Maybe I need my own podcast. Got a call today from a regional theater that I represent. And they are developing a show based on a very famous murder. And they're talking to me about what can they do and what can they not do? Can they, when they put the play on, use the real names of people from the story?
And I just want to thank you, because that's another one of the aspects of, quote, licensing that I definitely wanted to touch on. Also images, we'll talk about that too.
Okay. Can they use a newspaper article about this murder in the development of their story? And this becomes a very, and I'm gonna sort of punt here the way I did punt on the phone call. I said, one, I need to check your state laws to see what your rights of publicity are, because there are some states where the right to control the use of your name and likeness in trade and advertising survives your death. And this is generally in states where celebrities live. So New York, California, Nevada, there are laws that limit how you can use the names and likenesses of the deceased. But as a general rule, you have a First Amendment right. If you want to tell a story, you can tell the story and you can use the real names. There are some minefields you have to avoid. You can't defame them. That's really the big one. You can't defame them. You can't say something that's demonstrably untrue. And you also can't base your play on someone else's telling of the story. So when my client said, we have this newspaper article about the murder, and we want to use that, and I had to explain to them that all of the facts in the newspaper article are yours for the taking, but the selection and arrangement of the facts, the telling of the story, that is not. So if you want to base your play on the story as it's told in this article, you need to get a license from the copyright owner of that article. If you want to take the facts out of that article and use them, you can do that. But my recommendation to you is any fact that you take from the article, independently verify it with at least 2 other sources, so that there's no question that the fact that you're using is in the public domain and not owned by the writer of that article. Yes.
Kate, Catherine's asking, what if you put something in that is fiction? So can you take a real story and add fictionalized aspects to it, elements?
There is a risk of what we call presenting somebody in an unfair light. And it's a different type of invasion of privacy tort, where how do I explain this? Okay, long time ago, I was working on a play based on a documentary, and it was about kids. And the question came in, can we make so-and-so's dad an alcoholic? And I said, no, even though you're fictionalizing the character and you're fictionalizing the dad, when you say this is based on the documentary, everyone's going to know which kid you're talking about, and everyone's going to know that that kid has an actual dad. And so you're presenting that dad in a false light. You're suggesting that dad is an alcoholic, even though you fictionalized. So you probably want to stay away from things like that.
Okay, let's go to Carolyn Brown's question for a second for Liz. Sony and other music publishers have online portals for requests. How can one improve their chances of getting a response? I filled out submission forms never to receive a response. Does that mean no one has viewed it, or my terms were not worth approaching for the writers for the rights? You turn on your mic.
Sorry, I'm muted. Honestly, a lot of times what happens is those email portals get backlogged, and because there are people monitoring them who then assign them to the correct people, and a lot of times what happens is by the time we get them, the show is already over. Unfortunately, it's just a reality of I mean, we got across stage, film, TV, all the various different departments. I mean, we get hundreds of thousands. And so a lot of times, sometimes okay, no, I'm not going to say that because we're being recorded, but
I can edit it out.
Okay, well, that would be great. I will say, like, sometimes if it's a really tiny production and the amount of money that we would reasonably charge is not worth the manpower, sometimes we just let that go. I didn't say that, but it is that's just a reality. I mean, just there's only so much of us there to process that, but. Yeah, and that's why I recommend that you request as early as possible, because it takes a while.
Michael, I want to ask a little bit more about the music publishing business, the theatrical licensing business. Your music publishing, you got it. What is the process for you guys in terms of finding? How do you determine what you're going to add to your catalog? I knew Stephen before he started TRW, so I actually saw him start. I saw him when he had like 20 things in the catalog, and I remember when he was very open to new works back then, because he was building his brand at that point. Mm-hmm. Now that you're a brand, is there something that you're more likely to take than something else than another thing?
Well, you don't really want anything that you already you don't want to duplicate something in your catalog already. For example, not a Broadway. Well, okay, Broadway, Cinderella. If we were R&H and we had Cinderella, we would not be looking for another Cinderella. We have a TYA Cinderella. So if a new, for example, Andrew Lloyd Webber has a Cinderella, Bad Cinderella, whatever it's called, coming, would we be interested? Most likely. But his catalog is already in Concord, so no. But then you have two competing Cinderellas. You have the R&H Cinderella, and you have the Andrew Lloyd Webber. So we would not necessarily want something like that in our catalog. Otherwise, we're going to be bidding on first-class titles alongside of our competitors. Refresh the question for me again.
Oh, how you? No, you're answering it. You're answering it well already. I mean, basically, it's how do you decide which? No, I know that there's another side of it that we may not think about, which is basically the competition for hot properties. I mean, I know that you go into like a bidding war for hot properties. So we don't have to worry about them. They're fine. They'll be fine. But for other things, it's like, I mean, even as producers, when we're developing new pieces, what things do you think have the best chance for future licensing and would be of greater interest to you? Are there any things, any kind of generalities
that has the widest appeal possible, so that if it's going to be in my opinion, a Hadestown, oh dear.
It's okay, you look very dramatic now.
Sorry, lights went out in the office. They're on an automatic timer.
But the light on you is perfect.
It's my monitor. In my opinion, the Hadestown is an art piece that is going to be, it's going to live, perhaps is a good word, in the realm of professional theaters, professional LORT theaters, professional non-dinner theaters, if there are not too many of those left, actual dinner theaters. So it's going to, whereas it's not going to, and in university setting, it's not going to live in the schools primarily. So when we look at a title, we need to judge where is it going to live in the marketplace? Is it going to live only in professional land? Does it also have legs for stock and amateur, community theaters, religious groups, schools? Is there a potential for, if there's a lot of adult material, is there a potential for an adaptation strictly for schools to be more acceptable to community standards? What appeal does it have internationally? Is it going to have legs in other English-speaking markets, which are primarily UK, Australia, New Zealand? So those are all things we look at when we judge it. Is going to be, can we do an adaptation for middle schools that runs 60 to 75 minutes? And all of those elements are evaluated to determine.
If someone were to submit to you, would it be smart or would it be silly for them to actually include suggestions for how it would be marketed? I know people that have put together packages for submission that include educational materials. Is that useful for you if somebody put together something and said that this could also have educational component? And
I think it limits you, because if you're going to put that in there, we're going to think of you in that term only, in that market only, and that will box you into that market. I would say you want to be considered for all stages everywhere, and not limit yourself, because we will be able to determine, are there guns in it? Is there alcohol? Is there a lot of sex? Is there, but those things that schools are going to, not all schools, of course, but many schools will just ignore. So they won't even put on their list of possibilities. So we'll make those changes. We'll make that evaluation ourselves, and so I don't think you would. I think it would be more limiting if you did that for us, because
less work. So it's less work for us.
Well,
for us
yes,
writers.
exactly. But because I think that'll put you in a box, and you don't want to be.
I think it's good advice. That's great. I mean, it's something that it's what I would want to hear, because I don't want to get to the trouble of putting together all those materials. Um, so Owen or Jay, let me know if I'm missing any questions. I think there are a couple more questions in the chat, but I also, while you're looking for them, I want to actually ask Liz something. Liz, like I said, you were strictly a theater gal. I mean, you were in NYMF. You were the artistic director of NYMF.
No, I was general manager.
General manager.
Yeah, and then after that, I was at Theater Works for a long time.
So how has this transition happened for you? How have you gone from that into Sony? And
it was sort of completely by accident. I was at Theater Works USA, the children's theater touring company, and we were in the middle of mounting Lightning Thief on Broadway. And a friend of mine got an email from his friend at Sony, who asked, hey, we're looking for somebody to fill this theatrical position. We're actually interested in, rather than reassigning someone internally who knows the music world, we're looking for someone who has a theatrical background who speaks that language. And because the thing about theater, music licensing for theater, in many ways, it follows trends of the theater industry more than of the music industry. For instance, Broadway musicals are basically built around the guidelines of the approved production contract, the APC. It's, many of the same guidelines that are applied there, which is strictly a theater industry thing. I mean, you'd say APC to somebody in music industry and they have no idea what you're talking about. So anyway, his friend asked him if he knew anybody that might be right for the job, and luckily he recommended me, and then that's kind of how I landed there. And I didn't really have any background in the music industry at all, didn't know much about it, but sort of got a crash course and sort of figuring out how those two worlds commingle.
What have you learned about theater that you didn't know before taking this job? What were the new insights that you found suddenly working from this different perspective?
I mean, I think just understanding a lot about copyrights, and something that is very important to note as far as music. There are two different types of music copyrights. You have the copyright to a composition, which is basically the songwriter. So, that's what Sony Music Publishing does. We represent, the John Lennon estate and Dolly Parton and Beyonce as a writer, not as performing artists. But if you were going to use a recording, there's a good chance, depending on what type of production it is, you're also going to need to acquire the rights to the master, what are called the master rights, the recording. Because here's an example of that I use because everybody pretty much knows the song. If you came to me and said, I'm producing a show and I want to license the song, I Will Always Love You. One of my first questions is going to be, how is it being used in the context of the show? If you say, oh, during one of the scenes, a character breaks into song and sings it, then you're going to have to submit the proposal to us. We'll negotiate terms. I have to run it by Dolly Parton's people because, of course, she is the writer. Make sure they're okay with it. Then we license it to you. You pay us. We pay out Dolly. If you say, a character is listening to the radio and it comes on the radio, then the next question becomes which recording, because you're still going to have to go through us to get the rights to the composition, but you will likely also need to go to the record company that produced that particular recording, because you're now exploiting not just a composition, but you're exploiting somebody's performance of that composition, which is a separate copyright. So that's another thing that you need to be very aware of and be prepared. And I will say one thing that I've definitely learned about the music industry is that it is not intuitive. It can be very difficult to track down who controls these copyrights. You can, let's say you're trying to license one song. If that song has 8 different writers who collaborated on it, and all 8 of those writers are signed with different publishers, you're going to need to go to 8 different publishers to get permission on behalf of each of those writers, and you're going to need to have 8 different licenses to make up 100% of that song. And that's why many people, I don't often deal with producers or general managers directly. I'm usually dealing either with lawyers like Eric, or there's a specific kind of subset of the industry called like music clearance agents. Basically, their job is to have relationships with all of these music publishers and all of the record companies. They know exactly who to go to. They know who controls these rights, and they are able to streamline the process for you. And actually, harking back to an earlier question about how does my proposal not go into a generic inbox and get lost? You know, unfortunately, that's kind of one of the only ways that you can, unless you have a personal connection with the publishers and the record companies, that's a good way to make direct contact with the person who actually is going to be dealing with your request, is to hire a professional who has those relationships. So.
And one of the takeaways from that is if you're planning on licensing a song for your show, have a backup plan.
Yes.
Have a list of 5.
Yes, because here's the reality. I mean, there are certain songwriters whose teams just, they're very hard to clear. They very rarely give permission for pretty much anything. But one of the most frustrating aspects is, let's say you have one of those songs that has eight writers, and you get permission from 7 of them, and one of them just never responds. And that happens all the time. I have regularly sent up to, 10, 12 nudges on trying to get a request from that last writer. And if we never get it, we cannot license that song. So that's another reality of things just kind of getting lost in the ether, and you kind of have to just move forward with what you can.
So I just want to remind everybody that Sony is a huge player in this. There are a lot of people that know a lot about music publishing. There are a lot of smaller companies that you can deal with, and you can probably get one-on-one introductions to them, and they will know that when you say a certain song, they'll know enough to say, oh no, don't try for that. Yeah. That's not going to happen. So it's. I'm very lucky and very blessed to have had to know Liz and see her suddenly appear with Sony. It's like, oh God, I can ask Liz to be on a panel. This is great. But she has a lot of responsibility and is as overwhelmed and overworked as she's letting us know she is. I mean, it's huge. Sony's huge. I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of requests that are coming in.
Yeah. I mean, we represent, we administer more than 4 million songs. So, it's the largest catalog in the world. So.
Yeah, there you go. So leave it to me to bring on the person with the largest catalog in the world for us. But there are other people that I brought on to talk about different aspects of this as well, and there are people that you can talk to. My friend Jamie Rocco just started a business. He's a music licensing person, and he's pretty accessible. If you have questions about it, and you need somebody to give you a little guidance, I'm sure that Jamie could do it, and I know other people as well.
Yeah, Jamie is one of those sort of, among other things, he has a lot of different aspects of what he does, but he acts as a clearance agent for a lot of, like what I was just mentioning, for a lot of companies. So yeah, I work with Jamie a lot.
And you guys all met Jamie if you were here. She was one of my guests about 4 months ago. Who knows? Could have been 6 months. It could have been a year. I don't know. But he's been on with us before. So I wanted to quickly touch on something that I wanted to ask you guys before, which is how was your industry impacted by the shutdown, and how did you deal with shutdown, and also you can shoot me a private email if you have a hard out at 6:30. If I know that, we can just end at 6:30. But in 4 minutes, can you tell me what was it like for TRW, Michael, when shutdown hit?
It was hell. The only thing, truthfully, that got us through it are the schools. Schools got us through it because they have a budget they have to spend or lose it. I think we did at least 2 million in refunds going back. There are still some schools from second quarter of 2020 that, the royalties are sitting in limbo because they haven't decided, are we going to do the show? Are we going to officially cancel it? Do they have permissions from their board still in some places to do live performances yet? But we lost some people. That's the wrong phrase. Some people were let go. Salaries were reduced for almost a 2-year period. It was, it was more than tightening our belts. It was a very difficult time. And when folks were furloughed, the people who were left, it was kind of, I was one of them. It was kind of thought, well, it'll be slow. We're not going to need people full time or as much staff because, live performances really just hit a standstill. There's nothing we won't have anything for you to do. But it was just the opposite because everyone was contacting, what do I do? What can I do? What are my options? And the workload like quadrupled instead of diminish. So it was a very difficult time.
It quadrupled with fewer of you.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. It was no fun.
when did you start to see things changing, or have they changed yet?
A turnaround was 2021. We started to see a little bit come back, and this year, I won't say we're back up to previous numbers, but we're inching much closer towards pre-pandemic number of bookings. I will say that royalties, however, have not inched up in the same manner because folks are in the amateur world. They are anticipating lower attendance, and of course, that's going to mean lower royalties, and for us, lower commission. So revenue, amount of bookings is getting there, pre-pandemic levels, but revenue is not inching along as quickly as that.
Also, Michael, Maureen wants to know how many musicals are in your catalog, and the other thing is, could you actually list the different areas? I mean, there's professional licensing, there's amateur licensing, and do you have anything else? Are you subdivided in any other ways?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
I've seen on some theatrical licensing websites people that are in multiple divisions. It's not. It doesn't seem to just be professional and amateur. There seems to be other subdivisions. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I was noticing when I was putting this panel together. So what kind of divisions do you have?
Here, TRW and at MTI is the same. At least when I was there a decade ago. It's been, oh Lord have mercy. Professional department, a smaller because it's, I say, I quote, I term it as quality over quantity, and amateur department is going to be quantity over quality, the quantity of licensees, not material or anything. The revenue and royalties generated on the pro side, if there's 200 professional theaters, including the Lords and folks around, those people are more important because the revenues generated are much higher, and we'll limit and give exclusives and territory, especially when there's a new release. On the amateur side, I will say, when I was at MTI back in the old day, like from 2020 to for 15, almost 20 years, the industry has been, revenue would be more like 60-40 at the beginning of the century, 60 being in the revenue we see, 60% is professional, 40% amateur, and that is flip-flopped.
But there's one catalog. There's a single catalog for both divisions, or are there different Do you have
No, it's just the same catalog, whether
Yeah.
the licensee is the licensee. So you'll get more hand-holding, more priority if you're a professional theater, just because the revenue potential is, the box office potential there is huge.
And Maureen's question was, how many musicals are in your catalog? Just to give us an idea of size.
100 to between 100 and 150, I would guess. That includes the TYA, the off-Broadway titles, everything. Yes.
Okay. And Liz, Sony wasn't in the same position necessarily. There was a part of their business that was affected, and certainly in your division, lack of theater performances would have impacted you. But there's so much more that goes into licensing.
Well, yes. I mean,
in other words, shows don't come to you to say, "Can I use?" You have other people. You have commercials coming to you. You have all sorts of people coming to you asking for things from the theater catalog.
Oh yeah. Wait, well, for the overall catalog. I mean, we have in what's called the synchronization division, sync licenses that encompasses film, TV, commercials. There's also other departments such as karaoke, merchandise, and then of course there's like your mechanical licenses, which is basically your albums and your singles that are being dropped. But in live stage is one specific sector. What wound up happening with me was overnight, I kind of went from being the live stage licensor to being the streaming licensor, because all of these, there were a lot of theater companies that were doing online cabarets, or dance companies that might have footage from a show that they did a few years ago, and now they're streaming that for their subscribers, and they have to come back to us and say, previously this was a live stage license, now it's going to be a synchronization license that people can buy online, things like that. So I luckily was sort of further to what Michael was saying, where it was 10 times the work for a fraction of the money. That was a little bit what was kind of happening for me as well, because there were just all these tiny little streaming deals, that were happening. But then, what happened was, as things started opening back up, I mean, there were all of these shows that had kind of been in the pipeline and paused. And then, it's just sort of, there was just an explosion where everybody was hitting go as live stage was opening again. So it's still not up to where it was pre-pandemic for me either, but it was manageable, and it's getting there. It's almost there. So. Okay.
And the one other thing I wanted to touch on, with very little time left, let's talk about Concord Theatrical, if we can, and basically what if any are the implications of that for the business as a whole. I mean, to the outsider, to like me, who I don't know the law, I don't know a lot of stuff. It feels like monopoly. It feels like somebody's monopolizing a business. So just to keep taking more and more and more of the small companies and putting them together under their wing, which could be a very good thing. I don't know. It could be a good thing. It could be a questionable thing. I don't know. Legally, Eric, is there any legal position on something like this? Is it a wonderful thing that all these companies are being swallowed by a large entity?
I mean,
I don't mean to put it in a I know that sounds negative even when I'm saying it. I just don't know what the implications are.
You're speaking to an area of law, trade regulation, antitrust. I don't think that there's a risk that Concord is going to get monopoly power in this marketplace. Also, specifically because there are very established players out there who are not going to be acquired, and also because it's not really an industry where there's huge barriers to entry. So I wouldn't worry about that. I am fascinated by what Concord is doing, because they are integrating, they're vertically integrating. So they're acquiring licensing houses, they're also acquiring record labels, and they are developing the ability to exploit properties across multiple media. And I think it's really fascinating what they're doing. So, I do a fair amount of work on cast album recordings and other recordings, and they are a player in that market as much as they are a player in the licensing market. So I think it's fascinating. I think it's a way that if I were to voice what they would, I will tell you what was told to my clients who were with a smaller publisher that was acquired by Concord, that they were now part of a much larger family with much greater resources who would be able to promote them much more favorably. And I thought that was a little bit of hoo-ha. And then lo and behold, my clients were thrilled that they're getting a production in Evanston, Illinois, right near Northwestern University, for a show that they had put up off Broadway and they had not really seen licensing life. So I see a lot. I'm fascinated by it. I'm really interested to see where they go. I have clients who are happy to be part of it. So I am cautiously optimistic.
Michael from TRW, we have you sitting there in the dark. If you have to leave,
Sorry, I'll lean forward.
No. I'm just feeling badly that you're in an office that has turned out its lights and I'm keeping you here late. Are you okay?
It's fine.
Okay, so from TRW's point of view, what has been your response to seeing Concord becoming bigger and bigger and bigger?
Well, from my personal point of view, I can't speak to TRW. That would be a Steve question, Steve Spiegel. But we have been courted, so to speak, but staunchly independent. I don't think it's a good thing for authors necessarily, for writers, because Concord is Sam French, R&H, Tams Witmark, and the Andrew Lloyd catalog. Did I forget anybody? I think that's it.
But that's a lot.
That's 4 huge licensing houses, publishers that you could submit to, 4 different, perspectives, 4 different potential folks to represent your work, and now there's one. I don't think that's good. It seems monopolistic a little bit. As Eric said, I think it's amazing what they're doing, the vertical, as he described, the vertical, whatever the word was. And to some extent, Broadway licensing, you didn't bring that up, but Broadway licensing is following in a smaller, perhaps, but the same model by acquiring Dramatist Play Service and a boutique agency on the West Coast called
Stage Rights.
Stage Rights, yeah. So that they had a lot. Yes, they have a lot of reviews.
So here, what I'm very curious about is whether this business model is going to serve them.
I don't know. If I was a writer, I mean, if I was so lucky to get to a Concord, that was 4 companies, or now they call them imprints. I would think, good Lord, it's a phone book. How am I going to be distinguished amongst hundreds? Well, really thousands.
Yeah.
It's a great big phone book.
Samuel French had a thousand things in their catalog to begin with.
Yeah. So I would think I'd be scared to get lost unless I had, unless there was a first class production and or I had a brand that my work was based on a book prior, so that or a film, even if it didn't get to first class. For example, like Nutty Professor could still come in, I suppose. But if there's a brand out there that or a book that doesn't come to Broadway, but if I didn't have that, I would just fear getting lost.
Well,
I've noticed, because certainly in the music publishing world, I also have relationships with all of the theatrical publishers. Like I'm working on several deals with TRW right now, because a lot of times, certainly, let's say a show's on Broadway and then it goes into stock and amateur, then we're, conferring with those theatrical licensors in terms of collecting royalties, and sometimes we're a part of the agreement, et cetera, et cetera. One thing I noticed with Concord is for a while it seemed like the people who had been part of Tams Witmark and overseeing these particular properties were still kind of operating, like the point people were still the same. And then there were the people who used to be at Samuel French. And then over time, I've noticed it's sort of becoming more of a wash where it feels a little less, a little less personalized to the particular catalogs, if that makes sense. Am I making
Absolutely.
sense? Yeah. So where it's like, I have one point person who deals with this aspect of all of those acquired companies, and it feels, it does feel like things get a little bit more lost.
Well,
That's just
along the
my-
lines of what Michael was saying is when there were 4 different companies, you had 4 different shots at being their aesthetic of being something that they would be interested in, because to some degree, 4 different companies run by 4 different people with 4 different tastes are going to like different things.
Mhm.
But now that you're saying that it's become sort of homogenized,
That's the word I was looking for.
now that it's homogenized,
Yeah.
you're right. It's like you have to please the people at the top of the funnel, and that does mean that there are fewer. That it seems as, I don't want to state it outright, but it seems as if that could mean you're having fewer opportunities as a writer or as a producer to find a worthy publisher for a work that you've just put your heart and soul into for 8 years.
And I mean, don't get me wrong. I all the people I work with at Concord are lovely, and they are very responsive and seem, like they're really doing some great work. But it's just a very large structural change.
Once upon a time, Sean Flahaven was one of the people that I had talking about licensing to True all the time.
Yeah.
So I might reach out to him. I don't know if he'll be accessible or not, but at some point I might want to talk, bring Concord on and have a conversation. There are a lot of questions that are not asked yet, a lot of them, and I need to actually wind up, but what we do is we do breakout rooms. People have an opportunity to ask you additional questions if you can stay. If you can maybe stay till 7, we can do like breakout rooms. So I'm going to wind up today and tell people out there in YouTube land and also podcast land, you're going to miss some more interesting conversation because you're not here. So I would suggest that you email us at trunltd@aol.com and ask to be part of the Zoom room so you can come here and meet people and ask your questions. You can actually send me questions as well, and I can actually forward them, and I can find answers for you. So that's the kind of thing I do. So everyone out there in YouTube and podcast, thank you for being with us. I also want to remind everybody that we do this as a community service because it was COVID. So it's been pay what you can for 2.5 years. And I'd like to remind people that it's really nice when pay what you can means something. So we're at the end of the year. This is December, heading into 2023. And this is an opportunity to give tax-deductible donations to your favorite not-for-profit as the year is coming to an end. And hopefully we're in your top 10 at least. So maybe you consider donating to True. And we also want to let you know that next week I have a very interesting panel. I've got Donalyn Hilton from Goodspeed and BT McNichol from La Mirada. So we're going to talk about the impact of COVID and the coming back into live performance of both Goodspeed Theater and La Mirada. And they'll have a lot to say. And it's interesting, they actually did some parallel things over the past 2 years to survive during COVID, during shutdown. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. And at the end of the month, we're taking off Christmas. Forgive us. We won't be here on 12/23. I'm going away for the weekend for Christmas. But we'll be back on the 30th. And I'm going to 99% sure that I'm going to be having a conversation about the new equity and other union contracts and agreements I've got a general manager who knows a lot about what's going on. We've all been asking about that. What do we do? What is the showcase code now? What does it mean? So we'll talk about that as a way to end the year. That's a cork popper, here's to equity on December 30th. So join us. And that's it. Thank you for being with us, and come back. Okay, thanks.